My name is Eleanor Hart. I'm 68 years old, and last winter my own son kicked me out of the penthouse I helped pay for. He called me a useless old woman, while the ink on my husband's will was still drying. I left with one key, rusted, cold, the only thing Rick had left in my name, a forgotten garage in the industrial district. They thought it was worthless, but what they didn't know was it held the truth that would ruin him. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted the most. Because this isn't just a story about money or inheritance. This is about how far a mother can fall before she learns to rise again. When people talk about marriage, they usually mention the big moments, the wedding photos, the anniversaries, the vacations. But for me and Rick, it was the small, ordinary things that made 42 years feel like one long conversation. We met in Seattle, in the kind of rain that never really stopped. I was 24, still grading papers at night for a public high school, while he was trying to build a small logistics firm out of his garage. He had oil stains on his cuffs and a laugh that sounded like gravel rolling in a tin can. Somehow, that laugh made me feel like the world wasn't as heavy as I thought. We got married at City Hall. No flowers, no family drama, just 2 signatures and a cheap gold band he bought from a pawn shop. Afterward, we split a pepperoni pizza in our old Honda Civic, watching droplets slide down the windshield. We'll build something together, he said. Maybe not big, but honest. For a while, he was right. We built quietly. A house, a company, a boy. Nolan came 3 years later, a sharp cry, fists already clenched, like he'd entered the world ready to argue. I remember the smell of formula mixed with coffee at 3 a.m. Rick snoring on the couch, and me marking essays about The Great Gatsby while Nolan kicked in his crib. There was never much money, but there was rhythm. The first time I realized Rick's work might actually succeed was when he came home with grease under his nails and a new light in his eyes. Contracts, he said, dropping a folder onto the table. Real ones. He looked 10 years younger in that moment. By the time Nolan hit middle school, the company had doubled, then tripled. Our house moved from a single-story bungalow to a modest 2-floor in Bellevue. It was the kind of place where neighbors nodded but didn't ask questions. I liked that. Rick worked longer hours. I taught literature and eventually managed the school library. I thought the distance was temporary, just the cost of ambition. But then Nolan started talking more like his father and less like a boy who once asked me to read him bedtime stories. At 14, he wanted designer shoes. At 16, he rolled his eyes when I brought up college savings. Dad says I'll inherit the business anyway, he said once, dismissively, while eating cereal at the marble counter Rick had insisted on buying. That was the first time I felt the faint sting of being invisible. Rick wasn't cruel, just consumed. His love turned into quiet nods, half-absent smiles. He'd call me Elle like a reflex, not a choice. Then came the Venice trip, our 35th anniversary. Nolan was already working as Rick's assistant, wearing tailored suits and rehearsing charm. Venice was warm, crowded, beautiful, but something was off. Rick coughed too much that week. He brushed it off with a grin. We bought a street painting from a young artist near the Rialto Bridge, a watercolor of light on water. Rick said it reminded him of me. I didn't know he'd hide something behind it years later, a copy of a deed, a note, and the clue to everything that would follow. After that trip, his health declined. He started making phone calls late at night to Bennett Crowley and Martin Keene. I'd wake up to his murmurs through the kitchen door, the faint smell of chamomile tea going cold. When I asked, he smiled the same way he used to when Nolan was a baby crying at 3 a.m. Don't worry, Elle. I'm just making sure you'll be okay. I didn't know it then, but those words were the blueprint of my future. During those final months, Rick was oddly at peace. He spent weekends cleaning the garage, which I thought was nostalgia. He'd stand there for hours, staring at an old lock, brushing dust off boxes labeled private. I'd joke that he was turning into a sentimental hoarder. He'd just wink and say, "Some things have to look worthless to stay safe." After his funeral, the house felt both too big and too small. Nolan took charge: funeral arrangements, estate lawyers, all of it. "You just rest, Mom," he said, voice dripping with efficiency. That's how he always made cruelty sound polite. And when the letter from Gerald Moss arrived, summoning us to the reading of Rick's will, I felt a strange calm. I thought I knew what to expect. Money, house, company, everything Rick built. I assumed he'd divide it fairly. I didn't yet understand that fair was not what Rick was after. At the law office, the air smelled of paper and varnish. Gerald adjusted his glasses, read from the folder, and paused dramatically at every name. Nolan sat back, pretending patience, his Rolex glinting under the recessed lights. Mr. Whitaker leaves the residence at West Grand Avenue, the primary investment accounts, and all company holdings to his son, Nolan Whitaker. I waited for the next line. And to his wife, Eleanor Hart Whitaker, Gerald continued. He leaves title and sole ownership of property 1418, 1422 Mercer Industrial Way. That was it. I blinked, waiting for more. Nolan's lips curved into something like pity. That moment, the hush before humiliation still rings in my ears. Gerald cleared his throat, asked if there were any questions. Nolan leaned in, patted my hand. "It's okay, Mom. I'll take care of you." That's when I realized I wasn't in my husband's story anymore. I was in my son's, and I didn't like the role he'd written for me. That night, Nolan told me to pack a few essentials. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His words were sharp enough. "You'll be more comfortable once we sort out the house," he said, as if he were sending me on vacation. I left the penthouse at 10 p.m. The elevator mirrors reflected a woman who looked smaller than I remembered. My reflection asked, "What did you miss, Ellie?" Outside, the rain started again. I tightened my coat, pulled the old key from my pocket, and drove toward the address I barely remembered, Mercer Industrial Way. I didn't know it then, but the rust on that key was worth more than everything my son had just stolen. The garage stood at the end of a cracked road, half hidden behind a row of dying warehouses. The security light above the door flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. I parked under it, clutching the old brass key Rick had left me. The tag still read 1418, 1422, written in his careful, almost childlike handwriting. I remember standing there for a long minute, soaked in the drizzle, my breath forming little ghosts in the cold air. Everything about the place screamed forgotten. A rusted chain-link fence, peeling paint. A sign that once said, Whitaker Supply Co., now barely legible. It felt like Rick's last joke. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The metal groaned, resisting me until it gave way with a click so loud it startled me. I pushed the door open, expecting dust, maybe an empty room. Instead, the smell of machine oil and leather filled my lungs. Fluorescent lights flickered on one by one, revealing 3 silhouettes under tarps. My heart hammered as I pulled one back. A silver Aston Martin DB5. Perfectly preserved, gleaming like time itself had bowed to Rick's will. Next to it, a 1956 Mercedes, 300 SL Gullwing, and a Ferrari 275 GTB4. Each car had a small brass plaque engraved with Rick's initials. I didn't understand how he'd hidden them, how he'd hidden this whole world. On the workbench, there was a sealed envelope with my name. My hands trembled as I opened it. Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I left Nolan what he thought he wanted. I left you what I know you'll need. These cars are not trophies, they're records. Each one carries papers proving ownership, appraisals, and provenance. They're also the key to several trusts I've set up in your name. Don't sell them yet. Talk to Bennett Crowley. You'll find his card in the top drawer. He'll know what to do. And Ellie, don't hate the boy. Let him reveal himself. Only then will he learn what he's truly worth. The tears didn't come right away. I just sat there, listening to the rain tapping the metal roof. The sound was soft, steady, almost comforting. Rick had turned his goodbye into a puzzle, and I was the only one left to solve it. The next morning, I called the number in the letter. A deep, raspy voice answered, Bennett Crowley speaking. When I said my name, there was a pause, then a quiet sigh. So he finally left it to you, he said. About damn time. We met that afternoon. Bennett was in his 70s, short, with oil stains permanently etched into his fingers. He walked around the cars like a man greeting old friends. Rick started collecting these the year Nolan turned 21, he said. Told me he wanted to invest in something real, something his son couldn't liquidate overnight. I asked him what that meant. He just smirked. It means your husband was smarter than all of us. We spent hours going through paperwork, certificates, storage receipts. Everything was legitimate. Every car traced back to Rick personally, under a private holding company, one that listed me as sole beneficiary. It was overwhelming. That night, I slept in the small office at the back of the garage. There was a cot, a heater, a tiny fridge with 2 bottles of iced tea. I lay there listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and realized Rick had built this place for me. Not as a hiding spot, but as a beginning. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. 2 days later, I drove down to Carmel to see the cottage mentioned in one of the documents. The ocean smell hit me before I even reached the driveway. It was a small stone house with blue shutters and ivy creeping along the walls. The key worked on the first try. Inside, everything was simple. Oak furniture, linen curtains, a faint scent of sandalwood. On the wall hung the Venice painting, the one we bought on our anniversary. Behind it, taped neatly, was another envelope. Ellie, this is where I wanted you to end up. A place where you could breathe. If you're reading this second letter, it means Nolan has made his choices. I'm not punishing him. I'm showing him. He'll either understand or he won't. Either way, I trust you to decide what comes next. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that letter. Outside, the ocean roared against the rocks, but I didn't feel small. I felt anchored. Over the next week, I made calls. Bennett introduced me to Martin Keene, the financial advisor Rick had trusted. Martin was meticulous, almost intimidatingly calm. Your husband left a trail, he said. Clean, legal, airtight. He must have known what was coming. And then, quietly, Mrs. Hart, you're in full control now. But you'll have to decide whether you want to use that power. I didn't answer him then. I wasn't ready to think of myself as someone with power. I was just trying to survive. When Nolan called, his tone was sugar-coated arrogance. Hey, Mom, how's the garage? Need me to cover your expenses? The words stung less than I expected. I told him I was fine, that I'd found a place to stay. He laughed. Sure, just don't get scammed, okay? I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. I'll manage, I said softly. He hung up before I finished the sentence. That night, I opened Rick's letter again and read the final line aloud. Some lessons can't be inherited, they have to be earned. The next morning, I called Dana Caldwell, the lawyer Bennett recommended. When she arrived at the cottage, she didn't waste time with sympathy. Your husband was brilliant, she said, after reviewing the files. Your son, on the other hand, is about to drown in his own reflection. Let's keep it that way. I smiled for the first time since the funeral. It was the kind of smile that wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about waking up. And somewhere, in that quiet seaside cottage, I finally started to remember who I was before everyone decided they owned me. The calm didn't last. It never does. A week after I met Dana, I spotted a black sedan parked across the street from the cottage. Same car every day. The driver never got out, never smoked, never even checked his phone. Just watched. When I mentioned it to Dana, she didn't flinch. That's Victor Ruiz, she said. Your son hired him. Don't worry, he's good at finding things, but not at understanding them. Ruiz followed me for days. I could feel his eyes on me when I walked down to the beach or bought groceries at the corner market. The first few nights, I kept the lights off, afraid he'd see me moving inside. But by the 5th night, fear turned into something colder. I switched every light on and sat at the dining table, sipping tea right in front of the window. If he wanted to watch, I'd give him a show. A woman with nothing left to hide. Meanwhile, Bennett helped me document everything. We took photos of each car, scanned all provenance papers, and uploaded backups to a private server. He moved slower now, but his hands were still steady when he worked. Your husband did all this to keep control in your hands, he said. Not because he didn't trust his son, but because he knew power corrupts faster than love. Then the first phone call came. Nolan's voice was strained, the arrogance cracking around the edges. "Mom, we need to talk." The penthouse renovations ran into a few complications. Complications, in Nolan's language, meant catastrophe. He explained that the contractor found structural inconsistencies. The city inspector had flagged them. The cost of fixing everything had doubled. He needed cash flow immediately. "You still have that garage, right?" he said casually, like asking for spare change. "I do," I said. "Well, maybe you could liquidate a few assets. We could help each other." There it was. We. As if his crisis and my safety were somehow shared property. "I'll think about it," I replied, and hung up before he could charm me into guilt. That night, the USB in the Aston Martin caught my eye again. I hadn't opened it yet, afraid of what it might hold. But curiosity is a slow-burning fuse. I plugged it into Bennett's laptop. The file was named "If He Pushes Her." Rick's voice filled the room. Calm, warm, deliberate. "Bennett, Martin, if Nolan pressures Ellie, open only the provenance documents first. Keep the trust details sealed until she's with a lawyer. And if she ever doubts herself, remind her. This wasn't about punishment. It's about protection." My throat tightened. Rick had prepared for everything, even my hesitation. He had known I'd want to forgive too quickly. 2 days later, the news broke. Whitaker Development was under investigation for permit fraud. Not Nolan's doing. Not directly, but the kind of scandal that sticks. Blogs called it negligent mismanagement. Investors pulled out. Rumors spread that Rick's company had been hollow all along, just a tower of glass waiting to shatter. Nolan showed up at the cottage without warning. His car screeched to a stop, gravel flying. He barged in before I could speak. "Mom, you don't understand what's happening," he said, voice trembling between panic and rage. "The media's turning on me. I need liquidity now." "I can't help you, Nolan," I said evenly. He laughed sharp, disbelieving. "Can't, or won't. You've got millions sitting in that rust pile of a garage. You think Dad left that to you for fun?" "I know." I looked at him carefully. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked. He looked like a boy pretending to be a man. "Dad left me a lesson," I said. "Maybe you should ask yourself why he didn't leave it to you." That hit him harder than I expected. For a moment, the mask cracked. Then the anger surged back. "You always pit me against him," he snapped. "You were jealous of what we had." That made me laugh, a low, tired sound. "You had his name, Nolan. I had his trust." He slammed the door on his way out, the sound echoing through the little house like thunder. Evelyn Shore came over 10 minutes later, holding a casserole dish and wide eyes. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. "He just needed to see what he's lost," I said, but I knew this wasn't over. Nolan wasn't the kind of man to let humiliation sit quietly. The next morning, I found Victor Ruiz standing by my fence. He didn't hide anymore. "Your son says you're being manipulated," he told me flatly, as if reading from a script. "He wants me to check the garage for irregularities." I met his gaze. "You're trespassing, Mr. Ruiz, and you can tell Nolan that the only irregularity here is his conscience." He almost smiled. "You've got more bite than he said." I shut the door. That day, Dana and Martin came by. Dana wore her usual armor, a black blazer, steel gray eyes, and a voice that could cut glass. Martin followed with folders so thick they could have stopped bullets. "Your husband's trusts are fully operational," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "Each car links to a shell company tied to a charitable holding. If Nolan files a claim, he'll hit a wall," Dana added. "And if he tries to sue, the discovery process will bury him before he gets close. You're untouchable if you stay quiet." Stay quiet. That was the hardest part. By then, the press had turned the scandal into a feeding frenzy. Photos of Nolan, in expensive suits, splashed across business blogs, with headlines like, "The Prince Who Burned His Inheritance." He denied everything, of course, smiling through interviews and blaming legacy mismanagement. But his eyes told the truth. He was drowning. When Tessa Ng, his assistant, showed up at my door, I almost didn't let her in. She looked too young, too fragile to be part of all this. but her hands were trembling when she said, "Mrs. Hart, Nolan's going to lose everything. The investors want out. He's talking about using your assets as collateral." I felt something twist inside me, half fury, half heartbreak. "Did he send you here?" She shook her head. "He doesn't know I came, but I can't watch him do this to himself or to you." She handed me a flash drive. Inside were emails, loan documents, unfiled proposals, photos of construction damage, proof that Nolan had falsified timelines to secure another round of funding. If those files went public, he'd be finished. I didn't use them. Not yet. But I saved them in Rick's folder labeled, "For When the Mirror Breaks." Days passed. The penthouse project halted. Contractors stormed the lobby, shouting unpaid invoices. A video leaked online, Nolan arguing with the site foreman, slamming his fist against the railing. It spread fast, another crack in his perfect image. I thought he'd stay away. I was wrong. He came again one evening, unshaven, eyes rimmed with red. "I just need help bridging a few payments," he pleaded, pacing the living room. "You could sell one car, Mom. Just one. You'd still be rich." "Rich isn't the same as safe," I said quietly. He stopped pacing. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I'm surviving it." For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who cried when his toy broke, who used to crawl into my lap and say, "I'll take care of you someday, Mom." That memory hurt worse than his insults. Then he looked around the cottage and saw the Venice painting. "You even took that," he said bitterly. "Everything he ever gave me, you stole." "That painting was never yours," I whispered. He stormed out. Evelyn found me sitting by the window that night, the flash drive still in my hand. "You can't save him, Ellie," she said softly, "but you can stop him from dragging you under." The next morning, I called Dana. "I'm ready," I said. We met at her office. She prepared a file, restraining orders, asset protections, a media contingency. "This will hold him off," she said. "But if he comes again, don't engage. Let the lawyers do the talking." I wanted to believe that would be enough. But when the bank seized control of the penthouse project 2 weeks later, I knew Nolan would be back. And he didn't disappoint. Late one night, I woke to headlights sweeping across the cottage windows. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood there, soaked from rain, breathing hard. "Mom," his voice cracked. "They took everything." For a long moment, I said nothing. The ocean wind howled behind him, flinging rain across the porch. He looked smaller now, like the man had shrunk back into the frightened boy. I stepped aside. "Come in, Nolan." He hesitated, then walked in slowly. His shoes left wet prints across the floorboards, footsteps that felt like ghosts of every choice he'd ever made. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of his breaking and my reckoning. We sat at the old oak table facing the ocean, the storm outside pressed against the windows like it wanted to listen. Nolan's hair was dripping, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Between us sat the leather portfolio. Rick had left 3 layers of truth, waiting to be opened. He rubbed his hands together. "I just need time," he said. "The banks overreacted. Once I sell the penthouse." I cut him off. "There's nothing left to sell. You mortgaged it twice, Nolan. Once to fix what didn't need fixing, and again to feed your pride." His head snapped up. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said calmly. "I just learned when to stop pretending." He laughed bitterly. "This," he gestured around the cottage, "this is what you call winning? A shack by the ocean?" "This isn't a shack," I said. "It's peace. Something you've never owned." He opened his mouth again, but I placed the leather folder on the table with a soft thud. The weight of it silenced him. "Your father left this for you," I said. 3 things inside: the structural report of your penthouse, the timeline of your debts, and a letter. He stared at it like it might explode. "Why now?" "Because you're finally ready to hear it." He hesitated, then unbuckled the strap. The first document slid out blueprints with red circles marking the flaws in the foundation. Rick's handwriting was scrawled in the margins. "Don't rush what must last." The second paper was a printout of his accounts, loan interests, unpaid contractors, pending lawsuits. Nolan's fingers shook as he turned each page. "Where did you get this?" "From the people who tried to protect you," I said. "You didn't listen." His breathing quickened. "You went behind my back." I went where your father told me to go. Then came the letter. Nolan's voice faltered as he read aloud. My son, I built things meant to last. You build things meant to be seen. One day you'll understand the difference. The woman you think is weak is the one who kept us alive every time I failed. Don't mistake silence for surrender. He stopped, his lips trembling. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain and the hum of the old refrigerator. Then he whispered, He never trusted me. No, I said softly. He loved you enough to let you prove yourself. But love doesn't erase consequence. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands. I ruined everything. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The man who once towered over every room now looked like a boy who'd lost his map. After a long silence, I slid a single page across the table. These are my conditions, I said. You'll work with an independent fiduciary. You'll attend financial therapy. And if, after a year, you prove you've changed, I'll release a portion of Dad's trust to rebuild your life honestly this time. He stared at the paper like it was a sentence. You're giving me homework? I'm giving you a chance, I said. The last one. His eyes glistened, not with anger, but something else. Regret, maybe. Or understanding. He looked down at his father's letter again, tracing the signature with his thumb. For a while, he said nothing. Then, quietly, Okay, I'll do it. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just nodded and poured him tea. We drank in silence, listening to the rain soften against the glass. When he finally stood to leave, he looked back at me. You really think I can fix this? I met his eyes. No one fixes the past, Nolan, but you can stop building your future on it. He gave a small, broken laugh. You sound like him. I hope so. He left, closing the door gently behind him. I watched through the window as he disappeared into the gray, the waves crashing in the distance. The portfolio still lay open on the table, the letter's ink smudged from tears that weren't mine. For the first time in years, the house felt lighter, like the storm had moved inside him instead. The ocean was calm the next morning, a thin mist curling over the waves like a secret being kept. I sat on the patio, the same place where everything had broken and somehow begun again. The leather folder was gone. Nolan had taken it, but I still had something he didn't know about. In the glove box of the Aston Martin lay a small silver USB drive. I hadn't told him about it. Not yet. Rick's handwriting was on the tag. For Ellie, final instructions. When I played it, his voice filled the room again, steady and clear despite the years gone. If you're hearing this, it means the test is over. The rest is up to you. You'll find buyers circling the cars soon. Don't rush. Let them think you're desperate, then decide who deserves to win. He paused, and I could hear the faint sound of waves behind him, like he'd recorded it here, in Carmel. And Ellie, he said softly, remember, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Quietly, I closed the laptop and stared at the Aston Martin gleaming in the driveway. A few weeks ago, Bennett had mentioned that an auction house was sniffing around, spreading whispers that the collection was uninsured, trying to force a cheap sale. It was the same kind of arrogance Nolan had inherited, greed wearing a polite smile. This time, though, I wasn't the quiet wife in the corner. I called Bennett. Schedule a public inspection, I said. Let's show them exactly what they can't afford. He chuckled. Rick would have loved this. As I hung up, the ocean wind caught my hair, and I realized I was smiling not in triumph, but in peace. They thought they'd stripped me of everything, but all they'd done was hand me the one thing I'd never had before: control. And I intended to use it. If you've ever been underestimated, erased, or treated like you didn't matter, remember this: silence can be your sharpest weapon. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to survive long enough for the truth to echo louder than the lies. Before you go, tell me, have you ever rebuilt your life from the ruins someone else left behind? Drop your story in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for your own name, hit like and subscribe. This story isn't over.